Our next presentation will be the only one this evening in English. I would like to introduce to you Aldo van Eyck and Denisa Kollarová, and they will tell you about the research they have done into the 17 playgrounds by the famous architect Aldo van Eyck.
We designed a book about 17 playgrounds of Aldo van Eyck. We depicted 17 of them which are in the center of Amsterdam, and mainly because there were many more in the past, but we found important that we can let know people about the ones which still exist and which are still intact, and therefore we decided to make this publication. And we find it very important that people understand the reasons behind his design thinking and behind his projects, because it's many of you probably who knows these playgrounds, but not many of you probably knows also what are their ideas behind.
It started all in the 50s and 60s when Aldo van Eyck designed a ton of playgrounds that were placed throughout the entire city. It started with one experiment in the center. This was started by Jacoba Mulder, someone that worked for the city of Amsterdam. And at that time, there were not so much public playgrounds. There were playgrounds, but they were based on membership. And this was one of the first playgrounds where you could just go without being a member or without anyone there guiding you, except for the parents that might join you. It became such a success that quite fast after that, parents started to write letters to the gemeente to ask for more playgrounds in their city, in their streets, in their neighborhoods. And
so we see that the community played a big role in these projects as well. So the people were not quiet, but they really asked, the parents asked for these playgrounds. And maybe why we find it such a successful project is because of this design thinking behind them. And he always designed a certain set of elements of play equipment. Some of them we can name, but there are for sure many more. But it was always the sand pit, then there were some jumping stones and the climbing frames. And he always used the system for the specific location of the playground. So the playground never repeated the structure, but they were always special.
Yeah, so Van Eyck basically made his own toolbox consisting out of different play equipments, which were either concrete sand pits or blocks to jump on or to run around, or the metal climbing frames. And what he would do, he would be cooperating with the city of Amsterdam and parents that were writing letters. And like this, he would create a web throughout the city. So in the beginning, what they did is they filled up empty places in the city of Amsterdam. There used to be a couple of those. It's quite rare these days, but that's how his playground web started. And then later on, they became part of the expansion areas in the city.
Compared to nowadays, we can say that they are melting with the city by the design much more, because they are not very much like these colorful structures which we see nowadays, but they rather look like any other things on the street, and that's because of the colors and the materials he used. And important fact was also that they were never used by individual child, but it was always for the group of children to interact with each other on the play equipment. So they were enough big, and so many children could play on one thing, not only one children interacted with it.
Yeah, and I think his designs, they were very, very basic, very elementary, and very minimalistic. And one of the main reasons why his play equipment was designed this way was that he found it very important that the children could use their imagination. So rather than designing an object that already had a use, he tried to create stuff that children could use the way they wanted to use it, or the way they needed it for their game. So this climbing igloo, for example, this climbing dome could be used to climb on, but they could put some blankets over it, and then it became a tent, or it could be a space shuttle. So they were really open for imagination rather than this already thought of play equipment that you see these days.
As well, they were not really fenced off, so nowadays we see playgrounds which are very much surrounded by the fences because parents are scared that the child would run out and something was going to happen. But I think he was a great master in rather making a playground which is for a child enough that he's not going to get bored and he's not going to run away on the street. So he found it important that the playground is not boring and the child is not going to, rather than preventing it with a fence.
Yeah. What happened is that at first I think there were over 700 playgrounds, so it's really generation after generation grew old in those. I mean, I also grew up in Van Eyck's playgrounds, and also outside of Amsterdam, these playgrounds really became quite a known part of the cityscape, and slowly they started to disappear, which is also why we decided that we needed to create some kind of tour guide to at least guide you towards the ones that are still here. Which is quite typical, because when we were working on this project, we came across this climbing frame, which is a little bit handicapped. It was standing behind a primary school, and it was obviously going to be dumped or demolished, and we called the school and we asked if we could borrow it for an exhibition. And when we spoke to the director of the school, he was like, "Oh, please pick it up, because we take it. We want to get rid of it because we don't know what to do with it. We want to demolish it, but it will cost us too much money." Which is really painful, because I think he put so much effort in designing for children and thinking of what children would need. Where years later they just want to dump one of his play equipment. So we adopted it.
This is our child. We call it we would like to put it back into use, and we are looking for the cooperations with architects to put it back in the city of Amsterdam, because we found that it was very successful. Still, kids could recognize it and they really like to play in it. And we spent a lot of time on these playgrounds, and we really saw, even though the generation changes and we have computers and all this stuff, and children maybe tend to be more inside, there is still a need for these play equipments outside, and we want to come back with this equal.
Yeah, thank you.
So if anyone wants to contribute, where do they find you?
We will publish the book hopefully by the end of this year. Now they can find us online or here in Amsterdam, probably at one of Aldo van Eyck's playgrounds.
Playing.
Yeah, or talking to the playing children.
Thank you, Anna and Denisa. Wonderful presentation.